Who taught you to cook like that?" The cowboy's voice came low, rough as gravel, stopping Anna's hands cold above the stove. She hadn't heard a man speak to her that gently in 3 years. She kept her back to him, kept her eyes on the fire, kept her breathing steady, because the honest answer to that question would unravel every careful lie she'd built to survive. She said nothing, and Cole Whitaker noticed. If you've ever had to hide where you came from just to have a chance at living, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Annabelle stepped off the supply wagon with one suitcase, $2 folded inside her boot, and a story she intended to tell no one. She was 24 years old, small-framed, dark-haired, with hands that looked too delicate for ranch work, and eyes that had already seen enough of the world to know exactly how little mercy it offered a woman traveling alone. The driver hadn't spoken to her once during the 3-hour ride from Billings. That suited her fine. She had learned in the years before Montana that silence was the safest kind of company. Black Ridge Ranch spread across the valley below her, like something out of a painting she'd once seen in a hotel lobby she'd cleaned for 6 months. Rolling grass, a main house built from dark timber, a long bunkhouse to the east, fencing that stretched so far it disappeared into the tree line. It was the kind of property that told a person without a single word that someone serious lived here. Someone who built things meant to last. She'd answered the advertisement 3 weeks ago. Cook wanted, ranch kitchen, honest wages, room provided. She'd answered a dozen advertisements before that one. A boarding house in Denver had hired her and fired her after 2 weeks when the owner's wife decided she was too young and too pretty to trust around paying guests. A restaurant in Cheyenne had taken her on as a dishwasher and then promoted her quietly to kitchen assistant until the head chef discovered she could cook better than he could, and that was the end of that. A family in Casper had given her a room and 3 meals a day in exchange for cooking and cleaning until the husband started making excuses to find her alone. She'd left before the situation became something she'd have to survive. Montana felt like the edge of the world. That more than anything was why she chose it. The man who came out to meet the wagon wasn't what she expected. She had imagined someone older. Someone soft around the middle with the look of a man who'd inherited his land and his opinions both. She'd met that kind of employer before, comfortable men who believed that paying a woman's wages entitled them to her gratitude and her patience, and sometimes considerably more. Cole Whitaker was not that kind of man. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, though his face carried the particular weathering that came from years of working outdoors without apology for the sun or the wind. He was built the way working men were built, broad through the shoulders, lean everywhere else, with the kind of physical presence that filled a space without trying. He wore a gray shirt rolled to the elbows, boots worn down at the heel, and a hat that had clearly been through several hard seasons. He walked the way men walked when they were comfortable with their own weight on the earth. He looked at her once. Not the way men usually looked at her, with that particular brand of assessment that made her feel like something being priced. He looked at her the way a person looked at a problem they were trying to understand. "Annabelle," he said. "Yes, sir." "You cook professionally?" "I've been cooking since I was 9 years old," she said, "and I've never had a complaint worth listening to." Something crossed his face that might have been the beginning of a smile. It didn't make it all the way. "The kitchen is in the main house," he said. "I'll have one of the boys show you your room. Dinner is at 6. Ranch hands eat together. I eat at the same table." "Understood. One more thing." He stopped walking and turned back to her. His eyes were gray-green, the color of sage before a storm. "This is a working ranch. I don't have time to manage drama. Whatever you left behind you in the last place you worked, leave it there." It was not a kind thing to say, but it was not cruel either. It was honest in the way people were honest when they'd been burned enough times to stop pretending. "Mr. Whitaker," Anna said, and she kept her voice very steady. "I left my last position because the owner's husband didn't understand the difference between an employee and his property. Whatever drama finds this ranch will not be coming from my direction." The almost smile reached his eyes that time. He walked away without another word. Anna picked up her suitcase and followed the young ranch hand who'd appeared at her elbow, and she told herself firmly, quietly, the way she'd learned to tell herself things she needed to believe, that she was going to be all right here, that this was the place, that this time she was going to stay. The kitchen was in better shape than she expected, and worse shape than it should have been. The equipment was good solid cast iron, a proper range, a work table built for someone who meant to actually use it. But the organization was the organization of a space nobody had loved in a long time. Supplies stored without logic. Spices unlabeled or mislabeled. The herb garden, she could see through the window, grown wild and half dead from inattention. The pantry held enough food to feed 20 men, but it had been arranged by someone who treated cooking as a necessary inconvenience rather than a craft. The young ranch hand who showed her the room was maybe 19, with a gap between his front teeth and the look of someone who laughed easily when nobody was watching. His name was Tommy Briggs, and he told her this with the kind of pride that suggested he'd once been teased about the name and had decided to get ahead of it. "The last cook left in April," Tommy said, leaning against the kitchen doorframe while Anna opened cabinet doors and made silent judgments. Before that, Cole's wife used to handle the cooking herself, but she passed 3 years ago, and then we had old Pete doing it. And after old Pete moved on, we had a man from Texas who could make chili but nothing else, and then... "How many men am I cooking for?" Anna asked. "Usually 14-15 at full crew, more during cattle season. Dietary restrictions, allergies." Tommy blinked. "What?" "Anyone who can't eat certain things." He thought about this seriously. "Calhoun can't eat onions. Says they give him something terrible. And the new boy Luis, he keeps halal, or he tries to out here. He's been mostly eating around the problem." Anna nodded slowly. She was already rearranging the pantry in her head. "What did the last cook make?" "Beans," Tommy said. "Beans and salt pork, cornbread when he was feeling ambitious. Every day. Most days. Sometimes just beans." Anna looked around the kitchen one more time. Then she rolled up her sleeves. "Tell the men dinner will be at 6, she said. "And Tommy, is there a farmer nearby who sells fresh vegetables?" "There's the Hendersons about 4 miles east. They sell at the Saturday market too." "I'll need someone to ride there tomorrow morning." Tommy grinned. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am. My name is Anna." He grinned wider. "Yes, Anna." She got to work. She had exactly 4 hours and a pantry full of second-rate supplies, and zero guarantee that any of this was going to matter. But Annabelle had learned something in the years before Montana, in the years that she did not talk about and tried not to think about too directly. Cooking was the one place where the past couldn't touch her. The moment her hands started moving, chopping, seasoning, building something from its raw pieces, she stopped being the woman who'd been humiliated in San Francisco. She stopped being the woman who'd had to start over 4 times in 3 years. She stopped carrying whatever weight the day had piled on her shoulders. She just cooked. She found dried herbs in the back of a cabinet and sorted through them, discarding what had gone to dust, keeping what still held fragrance. She found a small wheel of hard cheese someone had apparently forgotten. She found potatoes that needed to be used today or not at all. She found beef that was tough but not beyond saving if handled correctly. She found a jar of preserved tomatoes. She did not make beans. She made a slow-cooked beef stew with the preserved tomatoes and the remaining dried herbs thickened just right, the kind of thing that filled a person from the inside out. She made bread from scratch, the recipe her hands remembered even when the rest of her tried to forget where she'd learned it. She made a simple salad from the only fresh greens in the pantry, not much, but dressed with vinegar and a little of the cheese, and something careful in the proportion that made it taste like intention. She set the table herself because she found she needed to. Needed the straightening of forks and the placement of cups to be something deliberate, not haphazard. She'd eaten at too many tables that told her she didn't quite belong. Every table she set, now she set as though it mattered. The ranch hands came in at 6. They were loud until they weren't. The quiet happened. The way quiet always happened when food surprised people gradually, then completely. One man took a bite of the stew and stopped talking mid-sentence. Another tore off a piece of bread and held it in both hands like he was afraid it would disappear. Tommy Briggs ate half his bowl before he seemed to remember he was supposed to breathe. Calhoun, the one who couldn't eat onions, looked up from his bowl with an expression of cautious hope. "There aren't any onions in this," he said. "There are not," Anna said. "I used leek instead, cooked down. If you can't eat leek either, I need to know now." Calhoun stared at her for a moment, then shook his head slowly, like a man witnessing something he hadn't quite believed in before. "No," he said. "Leek's fine. This is real good, ma'am." "Anna," she said. "Anna," he said with the reverence of a man who has been eating beans for 5 months. She noticed Cole Whitaker the moment he sat down. Not because he was loud, he wasn't. He came in quietly, took his seat at the head of the table, and began eating without ceremony. But there was a quality to his silence that was different from the silence of the other men. They were quiet because they were eating. He was quiet because he was thinking. She didn't watch him. She kept her attention on the kitchen doorway, on whether anyone needed anything, on the logistics of the meal, rather than its audience. But she was aware of him the way a person was aware of weather, without looking directly at it, knowing it was there. He finished his bowl. He set down his spoon. He looked at her, and then he asked quietly with a roughness in his voice that she would later understand was not harshness, but simply disuse, the voice of a man who didn't talk much anymore, and had forgotten how to modulate the asking of a real question. "Who taught you to cook like that?" Anna's hands stopped moving. She'd been wiping down the work table, a completely ordinary action repeated 100 times in 100 kitchens. And the question stopped her, the way a locked door stopped a person, not violently, just completely. It wasn't a cruel question. She understood that. He wasn't mocking her or testing her. He was asking the way people asked when something had genuinely surprised them, with the honest curiosity of a man who'd expected one thing and gotten something entirely different. But the honest answer to that question lived in a part of her life she had sealed shut. She said, "Just picked it up along the way." It was not a lie exactly. It was also nowhere near the truth. Cole Whitaker looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. His gray-green eyes moved across her face with the practiced stillness of a man who had spent years reading landscapes, looking for what was hidden, what was wrong, what the surface was concealing. Then he nodded once and stood up from the table. "Good supper," he said, and walked out. And the ranch hands started talking again, louder now, the way men talked when something had broken the spell of silence, and they needed to fill the space back up. Tommy was loudest of all, proclaiming to anyone who would listen that he had personally identified Anna as a talent and had been very helpful in getting her situated. Anna went back to wiping down the table. Her hands were steady. Her heart was doing something less steady behind her ribs. "Just leave it," she told herself. He asked a question. "You answered it. It's done." But that night, in the small clean room they'd given her at the back of the main house, with the Montana stars visible through a window that faced north, she lay awake longer than she should have, because nobody had asked her that question in 3 years, and hearing it again in a voice that carried no cruelty, just genuine surprise, and something that felt uncomfortably like respect, had opened a door she'd worked very hard to keep shut. The days that followed settled into a rhythm Anna recognized, the rhythm of work that had a real purpose. She rose before the men had coffee made and the first preparations underway, before the bunkhouse was stirring. She learned quickly what the ranch ran on: early mornings, hard labor through the day, meals that needed to be substantial, rather than fancy evenings that ended early, because 4 o'clock came fast when you'd spent 12 hours outdoors. She learned Cole Whitaker's patterns in the way she learned most things, by observation, rather than asking. He drank his coffee. Black, 2 cups, the first in the kitchen before anyone else arrived, and the second carried outside with him when he went to check the horses. He ate everything on his plate and never complained about anything, but she noticed he ate faster when he was tired, and slower when something was working on his mind. He had a particular silence. For each, the tired silence was flat and final. The thinking silence had a quality of contained motion, like water about to move. He rarely spoke to her directly. "Good morning. Kitchen looks tidy." That was about the range of it. She told herself this was fine. She told herself this was actually ideal, an employer who paid her wages on time, provided a clean room, and asked nothing from her except good food. She had worked for men who wanted the food and the conversation and the flattery and the admiration. Men who hired a cook and expected something closer to a companion. Cole Whitaker seemed to genuinely require nothing from her except the job she'd been hired to do. So why did the quality of his silence bother her? Why did she find herself making his coffee first every morning, setting it at the exact temperature that kept it drinkable for the 20 minutes before he came in? Why did she notice 3 days into the job that he didn't eat the cornbread she'd made, and then discover from Tommy, not by asking, but because Tommy told her everything eventually, that Cole's wife had made the same recipe, and the smell of it still did something difficult to him? She stopped making cornbread. She made biscuits instead, with a slightly different technique that produced a different texture and a different scent. Something that satisfied the same function without carrying the same freight. Cole said nothing about it, but he ate the biscuits and she noticed. That was the first conversation they had without any words at all. The first real crisis came on a Thursday, 8 days into her time at Black Ridge Ranch. 2 of the ranch hands came in for lunch an hour early, which never happened. Ranch schedules were held to strictly because Cole Whitaker held everything strictly. Anna had already served the main meal and cleaned up and was in the middle of prep work for supper when the door opened and 2 men came in with the look of people who had recently received bad news. One of them was a man named Grady, who was Cole's foreman. A big barrel-chested man of about 50, with a gray beard and the manner of someone who had been solving problems for so long that bad news barely altered his expression. But she could read the set of his jaw. "There a problem?" she asked. Cattled, Grady said, which communicated everything and nothing. "Cole, out with the East crew. We've got about 30 head run off into the creek drainage, and it's going to be a long afternoon." She understood immediately what a long afternoon meant. Men working past dark. No time to come in for supper. Meals that needed to travel. How many men in total out there? Grady thought. 8, maybe 9 by the time the second crew gets there. Anna was already moving. "I'll have food ready to send out in an hour. Can someone ride with it?" Grady stopped. He looked at her with the particular surprise of a man who'd expected to have to explain the situation in more detail. "That was going to be my next question," he said. "What do the men usually do when something like this happens?" "Cole, usually just they manage without." Anna looked at him. "They manage without supper." "Ranch life," Grady said with a shrug that accepted the fact, but didn't quite endorse it. Anna turned back to her prep work and began reassessing it completely. "In the future," she said, "when something like this happens, tell me early. I'd rather adjust than have men working through the night without eating." Grady stood in this doorway for a moment, watching her repurpose the afternoon's ingredients into something portable. Then he said quietly, more to himself than to her, "She's going to change things around here." Tommy, who had apparently been in the kitchen the entire time, and whom Anna had momentarily forgotten about, said, "I know, I found her." Cole came in that night near 9 o'clock. The main house was quiet, most of the ranch hands long since fed from the provisions Anna had sent out, and now turned in for the night. She was at the work table going over the following week's supply needs. She'd identified a system where 2 supply runs per week would keep the kitchen adequately stocked, rather than the single irregular run the previous arrangements had relied on. She heard him come in. She knew his step by now, the particular weight and rhythm of it. She did not look up from her notes. "There's stew left in the pot," she said. "Still warm. Bread in the cloth on the end of the table." A pause. "You didn't have to wait up," he said. "I wasn't waiting. I'm working." Another pause. The sound of him pouring water from the basin and washing his hands. The sound of him pulling back the chair at the head of the table. Then, "The food you sent out tonight." She looked up. Cole had his hands around the bowl she'd left for him, and he was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the cool assessment of the first day. Not the careful neutrality of mealtimes. Something more unguarded than either of those. "The men, they were talking about it," he said. "Out there in the dark working. Talking about the food." "Good or bad?" "Good," He looked down at the bowl. I haven't heard men talk about a meal that way in a long time. Anna set down her pencil. Mr. Whitaker, men work harder when they're fed properly. It's not complicated. It's not just the food, he said. Then he seemed to decide he'd said too much because he turned his attention to the bowl and said nothing further for a while. Anna picked up her pencil again. But she noticed her handwriting was slightly less steady on the line she wrote next. You can call me Cole, he said eventually without looking up from the stew. All right, she said. And I'm going to need you to tell me, he said, what it costs to do this kitchen the right way. Whatever you need, put it on paper and I'll look at it. She looked at him. He was still not looking at her, still eating. The words came out with the same cadence as everything else he said, direct without performance, just the statement of a thing he'd decided. I already started the list, she said. He looked up then, and something that was unmistakably a real smile, small, brief, but genuine, crossed his face. Of course you did, he said. Anna looked back down at her notes. She was smiling too, and she was very careful not to let him see it. The recipe book appeared on the third week. She'd been rearranging the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet, the shelf nobody used, too high to be practical, when she found it tucked behind a cracked ceramic jar and a tin box of old matches. It was a small book bound in brown leather that had been well handled once and then set aside for a long time. Inside, the pages were covered in the careful handwriting of a woman who had organized her recipes the way some people organize their hopes, systematically with detail, as if writing them down clearly enough meant they would always be there to return to. Emily Whitaker. The name wasn't written inside the cover. But Anna understood somehow in the first page that this was Cole's wife's book. She set it on the counter. She stood there for a long moment. She could put it back and say nothing. That was the easiest thing. That was the thing least likely to disturb the careful, workable equilibrium she'd been building at Black Ridge Ranch. She'd gotten good in the last 3 years at choosing the thing least likely to disturb. She carried it to Cole's office. He was at his desk going over something ranch accounts from the look of the figures spread in front of him. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. She held out the book. He went very still. I found it in the kitchen cabinet, she said. Top shelf behind the old jar. I didn't read it. I mean, I saw the recipes, but I didn't. She stopped. I thought you should have it. Cole stood up slowly. He crossed the room and took the book from her hands, and she saw briefly, quickly before he looked away, something in his face that she recognized. She recognized it because she'd worn it herself. Grief that had been settled and undisturbed for long enough that being confronted with it unexpectedly felt like a physical thing. Thank you, he said. His voice was even, controlled. Of course, Anna said. She went back to the kitchen. She did not cook from Emily Whitaker's recipes. That was not her place, and she understood it without having to be told. But that evening, she planted seeds in the neglected herb garden outside the kitchen window. Not as a statement. Not as a replacement for anything. Just because growing things needed tending, and tending things was something she knew how to do. Cole came around the corner of the house while she was on her knees in the dirt, and he stopped. What are you doing? He said. The herb garden was dying. I'm salvaging what I can. He looked at the garden. He looked at her. He said nothing for a long moment. Emily used to keep that garden, he finally said. I know, Anna said. Or I guessed. I'm sorry if this is... No, he said. Then after a pause, she'd have liked it tended. He walked away. Anna stayed on her knees in the dirt until she heard him go back inside. Then she pressed a seed into the soil very carefully with 2 fingers and told herself firmly, quietly, the way she'd learned to tell herself things, that she was not falling in love with this man. She was just tending what needed tending. That was all. She told herself this very convincingly. It didn't help at all. The letter arrived on a Friday morning in the 5th week. Anna knew it was for her before Tommy handed it over, because nobody else at Black Ridge Ranch had reason to receive mail from San Francisco, and the handwriting on the envelope was the particular handwriting of a man who had learned penmanship as a demonstration of authority rather than communication. Henry Caldwell. She didn't open it in the kitchen. She took it to her room, sat on the edge of the bed, and held it for a long time without moving. Then she opened it. Miss Bell, I have become aware of your current position. I write to inform you that I intend to pass through the Montana Territory within the month on business related to land interests in the valley. I look forward to renewing our acquaintance and to discussing with your current employer certain matters regarding your time in my household. I expect you'll find it sensible to reconsider your position before my arrival. H. Caldwell. She read it twice. Then she folded it precisely, creased it along the original lines, and set it on the windowsill. Outside, she could hear the ranch beginning its morning. The voices of the hands, the sound of horses, the far-off noise of cattle. The ordinary sounds of a life she had started to believe she was allowed to have. She sat there until she heard the breakfast bell. She'd installed herself a small addition that had produced from Cole one of his rare genuine smiles, and then she stood up, straightened her dress, and went back to the kitchen. She made breakfast for 15 men. She made it well because that was the only way she knew how to do things. But her hands, for the first time since she'd arrived at Black Ridge Ranch, were shaking. Not with fear, with the particular anger of a woman who had fought very hard to get somewhere safe, and who could now see the person who'd taken her safety before coming to take it again. She was not going to let him. She did not know yet how to stop him, but she was not going to let him. Cole found her that afternoon. She was in the kitchen garden harvesting the first small yield of the herbs she'd replanted. Not enough to matter really, but enough to feel like a beginning. When she heard his step behind her and looked up to find him standing there with the careful, contained expression he wore when he was going to say something he'd been considering for a while. "You got a letter," he said. It wasn't a question. Tommy, she thought. Tommy had seen the envelope and told him. She filed that information away for later. "I did," she said. "Everything all right?" This was the moment. She could say yes. She could say it was nothing. A letter from an old acquaintance, nothing to concern him. She was good at yes. She had been saying yes, I'm fine, when she wasn't fine for long enough that the words came automatically. But Cole Whitaker was looking at her with those gray-green eyes that read landscapes for a living, and she understood with a clarity that was almost inconvenient that he already knew the answer. "Not entirely," she said. He waited. "Someone from my past," she said. "Someone who made things difficult for me before I came here. He plans to come through the valley. He wrote to tell me." Cole was quiet for a moment. "What kind of difficult?" he said. "The kind that follows a woman," she said, "and makes sure everyone knows the version of her story that keeps her from getting back on her feet." Cole looked at her steadily. "Do you have anything to be ashamed of?" he said. "No," she said immediately, firmly. "Then we'll deal with whatever he brings when he brings it," Cole said. He said it the way he said most things, not as a comfort, not as a promise of emotion, just as a fact. A problem to be solved. A situation to be managed. She had spent 3 years wanting someone to say exactly that. Not, "It'll be fine." Not, "Don't worry. Just we'll deal with it." She looked back at the herbs in her hands and said nothing because she didn't trust her voice at that particular moment to stay steady. Cole stood there another moment, then started to walk away. "Cole," she said. He stopped. She was still looking at the herbs. "Thank you." He didn't say "You're welcome." He didn't say anything, but she heard his boots on the ground stay still for a long moment before they moved again, and that she thought was its own kind of answer. The herb garden grew. Not dramatically, not the kind of growth that announced itself. Quietly, in the way that things grew when they were tended consistently and without impatience. A week after Anna pressed those first seeds into the dirt, thin green shoots appeared along the edge of the kitchen window. 2 weeks after that, the garden smelled like something alive again, Cole noticed. He didn't say anything, but she caught him glancing at it one morning when he came in for his first coffee, and the look on his face was not the careful neutrality he maintained around most things. It was something older and softer, something that belonged to a version of him that existed before grief had reorganized his personality around survival. She didn't comment on it. She poured his coffee and went back to the biscuits, and he stood for a moment looking at the window before he carried his cup outside. That was how things worked between them now. A language built entirely of what was left unsaid, of what was noticed without acknowledgement, of small acts that accumulated into something neither of them had named yet, because naming it would require admitting it was there. It was Tommy Briggs who first made the mistake of naming it. He did so with the complete innocence of a 19-year-old who had not yet learned to read a room on a Tuesday morning when Cole was out with the East crew and the kitchen held only Anna, Tommy, and Luis, the young ranch hand who kept halal and had quietly started eating better than anyone at the table since Anna learned what that meant and adjusted the kitchen accordingly. "You know," Tommy said, sitting on the work table edge despite being told repeatedly not to sit on the work table. Cole smiles more now. Anna did not look up from the bread dough she was working. "Does he?" she said. "I've been here 2 years. I know what Cole Whitaker's face does. It does not smile. Except now it does. Small ones, but they count." "Tommy," Anna said, "get off my work table." "I'm just saying, since you got here, things are different. Things are different because the food is better. Men are better fed, they work better, they're in better spirits. Simple cause and effect." "Sure," said Tommy in the tone of someone who did not find it simple at all, but had decided to let the matter rest for now. He slid off the work table. "I'm just saying what I see." Luis, who had been quietly finishing his breakfast and had the wisdom of a young man who had already figured out which conversations to stay out of, picked up his plate and carried it to the basin without a word. Anna pressed her fist into the bread dough harder than was strictly necessary. She was not thinking about Cole Whitaker's small smiles. She absolutely was not. She thought about Henry Caldwell's letter instead, which was considerably less pleasant and therefore significantly more useful. 3 weeks had passed since the letter arrived. Nothing more had come. No second letter, no advance men, no arrival. Anna had begun to wonder with the particular wary hope of someone who knew better than to trust quiet, whether he had been making an empty threat. Henry Caldwell was a man who understood leverage. It was possible he'd intended the letter itself as the weapon intended the anxiety of waiting to do his work for him. It was possible. She didn't believe it. But she went on cooking, and the ranch went on running. And outside the kitchen window, the herb garden went on growing. And Cole Whitaker went on not quite smiling in ways that Tommy Briggs felt obligated to document. The crisis that broke the surface of that quiet Tuesday came not from San Francisco, but from the bunkhouse which Anna had not anticipated and probably should have. She was carrying the noon meal to the long table when she heard the argument-raised voices, the specific register of men who had moved past words being enough and were testing whether something physical would resolve the matter faster. She set the pot down on the table and walked to the bunkhouse door without breaking stride. Inside, Grady had his hand on the chest of a man Anna didn't recognize. Not one of the regular crew, someone brought on for extra labor during the increased workload. The man was maybe 40, with the look of someone who'd made a habit of pushing until something pushed back. Across from them, one of the younger hands named Delbert. 22, quiet. Hard-working, had his jaw set in a way that suggested something had already been said that couldn't be unsaid. "What happened?" Anna said. The three of them looked at her. "Kitchen business," Grady said, which meant not your concern. "Grady," she said with the particular steadiness of a woman who had learned to hold her ground in rooms full of men who thought they were protecting her from something. "What happened?" Grady looked at the unfamiliar man. The unfamiliar man, his name turned out to be Vickers, looked at Anna with an expression that she recognized immediately. It was the expression of a man who had decided from nothing more than her size and her function that she was irrelevant. "The lady cook," he said, making the two words do the work of an insult, "seems to have opinions about how men speak to each other." "That's correct," Anna said. "I have quite a few opinions. I also have the meal you're about to eat, so I suggest we discuss this productively." She looked at Delbert. "What did he say to you?" Delbert's jaw worked. "He made a comment about Luis." She looked at Vickers. "Luis works this ranch," she said. "He eats at this table. Whatever you said it about someone who is doing his job and minding his business, which is more than I can say for you at this moment." Lady Vickers said, "I don't take correction from a cook. You'll take it from me." The voice came from the doorway behind her. "Cole." She hadn't heard him come back in from the east pasture. He must have ridden in during the noise. He was standing just inside the bunkhouse door, and he had the particular stillness that Anna had come to understand was not calm, but its controlled cousin, the stillness of a man deciding how much of his anger to deploy and in what direction. Vickers turned. Something in his expression changed immediately upon encountering Cole's. "Mr. Whitaker," he started. "You're done here," Cole said. "Collect your pay from Grady and be off this property before supper." Vickers stared. "You're letting me go over how you speak to the people on my ranch," Cole said. "Yes, same standard applies to everyone. You've been told." Vickers looked at Anna with an expression she'd seen before too, the particular resentment of a man who blamed the nearest woman for the consequences of his own behavior. Then he looked back at Cole, and whatever argument he'd considered making, he thought better of it. He left. Cole stood in the doorway another moment. He looked at Delbert. "You all right?" Delbert nodded, still tight in the jaw. "Go eat," Cole said. To Grady, "Next time something like this starts, bring it to me earlier." "Yes, sir," Grady said. Cole turned to go. "Cole," Anna said. He stopped. She didn't thank him. She'd thought about it for half a second and decided against it because thanking him implied she couldn't have handled it herself, and she could have. It would have been harder and uglier, but she could have. What she said instead was, "Luis made those biscuits this morning. He asked if he could try. They were better than mine." Cole looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Is that so?" he said. "He's got good hands," she said. "And he's been watching me work for 6 weeks. I thought you should know he's got more talent than dishwashing." Cole was quiet for a moment. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. He left. Anna went back to the table and finished setting out the meal. Her hands were steady. Her heart was moving at an irregular pace that she attributed entirely to the confrontation with Vickers and absolutely nothing else. Luis appeared at her elbow. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. He was 18, slim, with serious dark eyes and the careful manner of a young man who had learned early that being conspicuous cost more than it was worth. "Yes, I did," Anna said. "Eat your lunch." He looked at her for a moment. "Those biscuits," he said. "Did you mean what you said?" "I never say things I don't mean." Luis went quiet. Then very softly, "My grandmother made bread every morning. Back home. I used to help her." He stopped. "I haven't made bread since I left." Anna looked at him. "Come in an hour early tomorrow," she said. "I'll show you the next step." And that was how the kitchen gained its first apprentice. It happened the way everything happened at Black Ridge Ranch, without announcement, without ceremony, through the gradual accumulation of mornings and small decisions, and the particular way that people came toward warmth when they'd been cold long enough. Luis came in early the next morning, and then every morning after that. He had good instincts and better hands, and the patience that serious cooking required, the ability to wait without rushing to trust the process. Anna taught him the way she'd been taught, by doing, rather than explaining, by letting him feel the difference between bread dough that needed more time and bread dough that was ready. He was a quick study. Tommy, unable to resist, began showing up early as well, claiming each morning that he happened to be awake anyway, which fooled no one. "You don't cook," Anna told him on the 4th morning of his early appearances. "I could learn," Tommy said. "You burned water last week. I watched it happen." That was an isolated incident. She put him to work chopping vegetables, at which he was adequate, and let him stay. The kitchen became crowded in the mornings. She hadn't planned it. She hadn't planned any of the ways Black Ridge Ranch was shifting around her the dinner table that had grown longer by necessity, because more men wanted to eat there, the way the meal conversation had changed from brief and functional to something that sometimes lasted past the time when work called them back. The growing number of small kindnesses between the men themselves that she suspected had something to do with being fed in a way that reminded them they were people rather than labor. Cole noticed all of it. She knew he noticed because he was Cole Whitaker, and noticing was what he did with the land, with his cattle, with the people on his property. He read things. He watched things. He did not always speak about what he saw, but the information went somewhere inside him and stayed. On a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks into the new rhythm, he came into the kitchen after supper when the others had already gone. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that he sat down at the table, not the head where he always sat with the crew, but the smaller kitchen table where Anna did her planning work, and he sat there without an obvious purpose. She raised an eyebrow. "Coffee," she said. "Please," he said. She poured 2 cups and sat across from him and waited. Cole wrapped both hands around his mug. He had big hands. She'd noticed this before, the hands of someone who worked with them constantly, with the particular kind of careful strength that came from years of doing things that required both force and precision. "Grady told me something," he said. "All right. He said the men are working harder." He looked up from the mug. "He said he noticed it about 3 weeks in. Said he couldn't figure out why at first, but he thinks now it's because they're eating better, sleeping better. And he said this specifically, which surprised me, because they feel like somebody gives a damn." Anna said nothing. "He said the last part was your doing," Cole said. "Not the food, or not just the food. The way you run the kitchen, the way you remember things. What everyone likes, what bothers them, what they need. He said it's like having a—" He stopped, turned the mug in his hands. "He said it's like having someone look out for them." "Grady is observant," Anna said carefully. "He is." Cole looked at her. "I wanted you to know I see it too." She held his gaze. "It's my job." "No," he said. "It's not. Cooking is your job. The rest of it, that's a choice you're making, every day." He paused. "I wanted to say I appreciate it. The men do. This ranch does." She hadn't expected that. She'd expected something more transactional, a comment about efficiency, about the measurable improvements in crew performance. Not this. Not the direct, unguarded acknowledgement of what it actually was. She looked down at her coffee. "Mr. Whitaker." "Cole." "Cole." She looked up. "I spent a lot of years in places where what I gave was taken without being noticed. It matters that you said that." He nodded once. He didn't make it large, didn't fill the space with more words than necessary. Just the nod, and then, "Is the supply arrangement working?" "The twice-weekly run." "Better than I expected," she said. "I need to add one more item to the regular order, though. Calhoun's been eating around the issue with his onion sensitivity. If I have consistent access to leek and shallot, I can build meals around that, rather than having him compensate." Cole looked at her with an expression she'd seen on him 3 or 4 times now, the look of someone encountering a level of attention to detail that he hadn't anticipated and didn't quite know what to do with. "Add it to the order," he said. "I already did," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Of course you did," he said. And there it was again, the same exchange they'd had that first night over the supply list, the same small rhythm, except this time it lasted longer on his face and reached further into his eyes, and Anna felt it settle somewhere in her chest, in a way that was going to require consideration later in the privacy of her room, away from those particular gray-green eyes. She looked back down at her coffee. She did not look at his hands. She was very disciplined about not looking at his hands. Then the thing happened that she would later understand was the moment the story changed direction, though she didn't recognize it as that until afterward. Cole set his mug down. He leaned back in the chair, and he said, not looking at her, looking at the window where the herb garden was just barely visible in the evening light. "She used to sit at this table and write out the week's menus on Sunday evenings." Anna went still. She understood immediately who he meant. "She'd argue with herself about them," Cole said. His voice was even. Careful the way hands were careful around something they might break. She'd write something down, cross it out, try again. She had opinions about food. Strong opinions. She believed she used to say that how you ate told you something true about a person, whether they ate fast or slow, what they chose when there was a choice. She paid attention to all of it. He was quiet for a moment. "I thought that was particular to her," he said. "The paying attention. I thought it was something she did." He looked at Anna. "I want you to know I understand," he said, "that you're not her, that what you do here is yours. Not a replacement for anything." Anna felt the weight of what he was offering, the particular courage it took for a man who did not speak easily to say a thing like that, to make the distinction out loud, so she would know it had been made. "I know," she said quietly. "And I want you to know I wasn't trying to—" "I know," he said. "That's why I could say it." They sat in silence for a while. Not the uncomfortable silence of people who have nothing to say to each other, but the quieter silence of people who have just said something real and are letting it settle. Outside, the Montana evening was doing something complicated with the light. Inside the kitchen held the smell of the day's cooking and the faint green scent of the herb garden and the warmth of a fire that was burning down to coals. Anna was thinking about the letter still sitting on her windowsill. She was thinking about Henry Caldwell and the version of her story he intended to bring to this valley. She was thinking about how carefully she had built this table, this kitchen, this particular quiet, and how quickly it could be taken apart. She should tell Cole. She knew she should tell him more than she'd told him. Not just someone from my past, someone who made things difficult, which was technically true and practically useless. She should tell him the whole of it. But if she told him the whole of it, he would have to decide what he thought of it. And she had spent 3 years living with what people decided when they knew the whole of it, and the decision had been reliably that the woman in the story was at fault for the things that happened to her, because women in stories were always at fault for the things that happened to them. Cole Whitaker did not seem like that kind of man. But she had thought that before about other men and been wrong. She kept the rest of the story to herself one more night. She would not be able to keep it much longer, because the following Saturday at the market in town, Anna turned a corner between the vegetable stands and the dry goods booth and came face to face with a man she had hoped never to see again. He was shorter than she remembered, or perhaps she had remembered him larger, because fear had a way of inflating the people who caused it. He was well-dressed for a Saturday market in a small Montana town, the kind of well-dressed that was meant to communicate something. Brown hat, good coat, the ease of a man who had never in his life had to wonder whether he could afford what he wanted. Henry Caldwell looked at her and smiled. It was the particular smile of a man who had been holding a card and had just found the right moment to play it. "Miss Bell," he said. "What a remarkable coincidence." She did not return the smile. "Mr. Caldwell, you're looking well." He looked her over in a way that was designed to make her feel looked at. "Montana seems to agree with you." "What do you want?" she said. He raised his eyebrows at the directness of it, performing surprise. "I've already told you what I want, in my letter." He glanced past her at the market around them, at the women shopping with their baskets, at the men discussing prices at the general community of a small western town, going about its Saturday business. "Or rather, what I'd like to avoid, which I'm sure you would too." "You have nothing on me," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady her voice was. "I have a great deal," he said pleasantly. "Stories have a way of surviving, Miss Bell, especially the kind that explain why a young woman had to leave a respectable position in a great hurry." His eyes moved past her again, and this time they focused on something specific, and his smile changed quality. She turned. Cole was 20 feet away at the hardware booth, not looking at them. He'd ridden in separately to handle supply business. He didn't know Caldwell was here. He didn't know Caldwell was standing 6 feet from her right now. Caldwell said softly. "That would be the rancher, I assume. Cole Whitaker. I've done some research on your new situation." He tilted his head. "He seems like a man who values reputation, history, character." "He is," Anna said. "Then you understand," Caldwell said, "that he might find certain information about your past employment quite clarifying." She looked at him directly. She was angry in a way that had passed the shaking stage and arrived somewhere calmer and colder and considerably more dangerous. "Say whatever you plan to say," she told him. "And then I'd like you to consider carefully what happens when I say what I know about you." Something moved behind Caldwell's eyes. Not fear, not yet, but its first cousin. The flicker of a man who had not expected the ground to shift. "Miss Bell, you have land interests in this valley," she said quietly, precisely. "I know because your letter said so. And I spent 8 months in your household, Mr. Caldwell. I heard a great many things in 8 months. Things about how you acquire land. Things about what you do with the men who own it before you do." She held his gaze. "I'm a very attentive listener, always have been. You used to complain about it. The smile on Henry Caldwell's face did not disappear, but it rearranged itself into something smaller and more calculated. "We'll speak again," he said. "I imagine we will," she said. He turned and walked away through the market crowd with his good coat and his deliberate ease, and Anna stood there watching him go and breathing carefully through her nose until her heart stopped doing what it was doing. Cole appeared at her shoulder. She had not heard him approach. "Who was that?" he said. She turned. His eyes were on Caldwell's retreating back, and there was something in his expression that told her he had caught at least some of the tenor of the conversation, even if he hadn't heard the words. "Henry Caldwell," she said. Cole looked at her. "The one from your letter?" "Yes." A long pause. "He's here early," Cole said. "He is." Cole watched the direction Caldwell had gone. Then he said quietly, with the particular stillness of a man who had already made a decision and was simply informing her of it. "Whatever he has to say, he'll say it to me directly. Not to the town, not behind your back." He looked at her. "You have my word on that." Anna looked at him. She had survived a great many things by depending on no one but herself. She had built self-sufficiency the way other people built walls, deliberately, and with an understanding that it was the only reliable protection. Depending on other people meant giving them the power to fail her, but Cole Whitaker was looking at her with those steady gray-green eyes, offering her his word with the same directness he brought to everything else, and she found to her own considerable inconvenience that she believed him. "He's not just here about me," she said. "He has interests in the valley, land interests. He hinted at it in the letter, and he confirmed it today. I don't know the specifics yet, but—" "I'll look into it," Cole said. "Cole, I'll look into it," he said again. "And then we'll know what we're actually dealing with." He paused. "We, Anna. Not you alone." She looked at him for a long moment. The market moved around them, voices and commerce, and the ordinary texture of a Saturday. And Cole stood in the middle of it with his hat and his worn boots and his complete undemonstrative certainty. And Anna felt something crack open in her chest that she had been keeping very carefully sealed for 3 years. She did not say thank you. She'd decided that on the ride into town. She said, "He's going to talk to people before you can get to him." "Probably," Cole agreed. "Are you prepared for that?" He looked at her steadily. "Are you?" he said. She thought about it. Honestly. Not the reflexive "yes, I'm fine" that had sustained her through 3 years of starting over, but the real answer, the one that lived below the competence and the carefully maintained steadiness. "I don't know," she said. Cole nodded, as if this was the answer he'd expected, and the one he could actually work with. "Then we figure it out together," he said. "Starting with finding out what he actually wants with the land in this valley. Because I have a suspicion." His voice dropped a register, going quieter in a way that was not softness, but something with edges. "That what he wants from you and what he wants from this territory are not separate problems." He was right. She knew he was right before she knew why, with the particular instinct of someone who had lived in Henry Caldwell's orbit long enough to understand how he constructed his leverage. She looked out across the market toward where Caldwell had disappeared. "He's not done," she said. "No," Cole said. "He's not." He picked up the supply box he'd set down at his feet and looked at her with a directness that was somewhere between a rancher assessing the situation and something else that she refused to name but could not quite avoid feeling. "Neither are we." They rode back from the market mostly in silence, which was not unusual between them, except that this silence had a different quality than the ones that had come before. The previous silences had been comfortable to people who had learned to exist near each other without requiring noise to fill the space. This one had weight. It had the particular density of things unsaid that both people knew were coming, and neither had yet found the precise words for. Anna sat straight in the wagon seat. She was good at straight. She had learned to carry herself that way in rooms where she'd been made to feel small, as if posture alone could communicate something her circumstances couldn't. Cole drove without looking at her, which she appreciated. She needed to think. She needed to organize what she knew about Henry Caldwell into something she could actually say out loud, because she understood now that the time for keeping her history in a sealed compartment was running out faster than she'd planned. The first thing she needed to figure out was exactly what he wanted with the valley. The second thing. The harder thing was how much of her own story she was willing to hand to a man she had come to trust but had not yet fully tested. She thought about what Cole had said in the market. We. The word sat in her chest like something warm she didn't entirely know what to do with. She had been a we before in San Francisco, with people she'd believed were on her side, and the cost of that particular we had been everything she'd spent the following 3 years rebuilding. She did not step into we lightly anymore, but Cole was not that. She knew this the way she knew the difference between dough that was ready and dough that needed more time, not from being told, but from having handled enough of both to recognize the real thing. When they got back to the ranch before she could go inside, Cole said, "After supper, come find me in the office. Bring whatever you know." She nodded and went to the kitchen. She made supper. She made it well, as she always did, because her hands knew what to do, even when her mind was somewhere else entirely. The meal was a good one, a roasted chicken with the first real herbs from the garden potatoes. Done right. A simple apple dessert that Luis had helped with that morning before the market trip, his quiet pride in the final product visible in the careful way he'd covered it with a cloth. The table was loud. The men had stories from the week's work. Tommy was in the middle of a dramatic retelling of something that had happened near the creek that seemed to involve a horse, a fence post, and his own considerable dignity, all three of which had apparently suffered. Luis was laughing for the first time. Anna could remember hearing a real laugh unguarded. Calhoun was having a slow and serious argument with a man named Patterson about the relative merits of 2 different rope techniques, the kind of argument that could only be had between men who were comfortable enough together to disagree. Anna sat at the edge of it and let it wash over her and tried to memorize it, this specific version of this specific evening, the way a person memorized something they were afraid of losing. Cole caught her eye from across the table. She looked away first. After supper. After the table was cleared, and Luis and Tommy were doing the washing up and the bunkhouse noise was starting up through the walls, the nightly ritual of men unwinding from the day. Anna walked to Cole's office and knocked. "Come in," he said. How was at the desk? He had a map spread out weighted at the corners. She recognized it as a land survey map, the kind that showed property boundaries, water rights, the legal geography of the valley. He'd been making notes in the margins. She sat in the chair across from him without being invited because they were past the formality of being invited to sit down. "Tell me what you know about him," Cole said. "Not tell me about your past, not explain yourself. Just what do you know about him?" The distinction was not lost on her. She folded her hands in her lap. "I worked in his household for 8 months," she said. "I was hired as a kitchen assistant, but his French chef, a man named Dubois, who was in his 60s and had been with the family for 20 years, he saw that I had aptitude, and he taught me properly. Real technique, not just recipes." She paused. "Dubois was the kindest employer I've ever had. He died of a heart attack in February of last year." Cole listened. "Caldwell ran his household the way he ran his business interests," she said. "Everything was leverage. He was charming when he needed something from you, and entirely indifferent when he didn't. The staff understood this. We all navigated around it." "What changed?" Cole said. She looked at him directly. "He began acquiring properties in the city, several in a row, all from men who had borrowed money from Caldwell's lending operation. The loans were written in language designed to be misunderstood. The terms shifted in ways the borrowers didn't catch until it was too late. By the time they understood what they'd signed, the property was already in Caldwell's name, and the law was on his side." She paused. "I heard the details because his business meetings happened in the dining room, and kitchen staff are invisible in dining rooms. Caldwell never once considered that the woman clearing the table was listening." Cole had gone very still. "I documented it," she said. "I wrote down what I heard with dates and the names of the properties and the names of the men who'd lost them. I wasn't sure why at the time. It wasn't as if I had anyone to give the information to. I knew it was wrong, and I needed to write it down. I needed to have a record of it somewhere." "Where are those notes?" Cole said. "With me. In my room." Cole looked at her steadily. "He found out," she said before he could ask. "One of the other staff told him. Not maliciously, I think she didn't understand what she was telling him, just mentioned in passing that I took notes about the household. He searched my room when I was out. He read what I'd written. She stopped, looked at her folded hands. He dismissed me that afternoon, and before I had left the property, he'd already started the story that explained why I'd been let go. The story made me the problem. The silence in the office was the kind that came after something landed. "What did he tell?" Cole said. His voice was measured. She noticed his hands flat on the desk and the particular quality of stillness that she knew now was controlled anger rather than calm. "That I'd stolen from the household," she said. "Money specifically. No evidence was ever produced because there wasn't any, but the accusation was enough. In the circles he moved in, an accusation was sufficient." She met Cole's eyes. "I left San Francisco because there was nothing left to stay for. 2 other positions I'd been offered were withdrawn within a week. The woman who ran the boarding house where I lived asked me to find other arrangements. I had a reference from Dubois before he died, and nothing else, and I used that reference to get every position I've had since, and I haven't gone back to a city large enough for Caldwell's reputation to have arrived before me." The clock on the office wall counted seconds. "Until now," Cole said. "He found me," she said. "I don't know how. I was careful. He came to the valley for the land," Cole said. He turned the map toward her and pointed to a section along the western ridge. 3 properties. I've been hearing about it through Grady. The owners are men I know. Good men, not wealthy men." His finger traced the lines on the map. "All 3 have had correspondence recently from an investment firm out of Denver that's offered to help them manage their water rights through the upcoming dry season. The firm is offering favorable loan terms." Anna looked at the map. Then she looked at Cole. "It's the same mechanism," she said. "Different state, different names, same structure." "The loan terms shift," he said. "After the papers are signed," she said. "Yes. And by the time the borrower understands what happened, the law reads it as a valid contract." She leaned forward. "The men I heard him discuss in San Francisco, 2 of them tried to fight it in court. They lost. The contracts were technically legal, just deliberately written to be misread." "Not here," Cole said. The certainty in his voice was quiet and absolute. "Cole," she said carefully, "he has resources, legal resources. If he's done this before and succeeded." "He's never done it in a place where everyone knows each other," Cole said. He looked up from the map. "The 3 men he's targeting, I've known them since I was 12 years old. We've worked together through 3 hard winters. When I tell them what he's planning, they'll listen. And then we'll need what you have." She understood. "My notes," she said. "Do they document the pattern clearly enough?" "They do," she said. "The pattern is the same. If a lawyer looked at them alongside the loan documents from Denver." "Billings," Cole said. "There's a lawyer in Billings who handles federal land cases. I've worked with him before. Honest man." He looked at her. "Are you willing to give me your notes?" She looked at him for a long moment. This was the question underneath the question. Not just, can I use your documentation, but do you trust me with the thing that has cost you everything? She reached into the pocket of her dress. She'd brought them, folded, worn at the creases from being carried for a year and a half through too many rented rooms. She set them on the desk. Cole looked down at the pages. He didn't touch them yet. "I need you to understand something," he said. "All right," she said. "Whatever he says about you in this town, whatever version of your history he circulates, it won't change what I know, what the men on this ranch know." He looked up. "You've shown this valley who you are for 7 weeks. He can tell whatever story he likes. The town will already have another story to measure it against." She had not expected that. She had expected the practical reassurance. "We'll deal with it. We'll fight it. Here's the plan." She had not expected him to say the quieter thing, the thing underneath the plan. Her throat did something complicated. "You don't know the whole of what he'll say," she said. "Doesn't matter," Cole said simply. "Cole, does it change what you did for this ranch?" he said. "Does it change who you are in that kitchen? Does it change the fact that Luis is learning to cook because you saw something in him and took the time?" He shook his head. A man who manufactures charges against a woman he employed to protect his business interests doesn't get to define her. Not here. Anna looked at the desk. She breathed carefully. He's going to come to the ranch, she said. He all but promised it. Let him come, Cole said. You can't just... Anna. His voice was quiet and very steady. Let him come. She looked up. He was watching her with that particular directness. The look that she had learned over 7 weeks meant he had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up with it. She wanted to argue. She was good at arguing, at laying out the practical complications, at identifying the 10 ways a situation could go wrong before it had a chance to go right. She had survived by doing exactly that, by anticipating the damage before it arrived. But she looked at Cole Whitaker across his desk, with her 3 years of careful handwritten notes sitting between them, and she said, "All right." He picked up the notes. He read them carefully, the way he read things thoroughly, without rushing, with a concentration that gave the material its full due. She watched his expression process what was on the pages and stay controlled through all of it, except for one moment, near the end of the second page, when something moved through his jaw. He set the pages down. "I'll ride to the 3 properties tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll bring Grady. You stay." He stopped, because at that exact moment the office door opened. Not a knock, not a pause. It opened the way doors opened when the person on the other side had decided that whatever was behind them was already theirs. Henry Caldwell walked into Cole Whitaker's office. Howe was alone. He was in his traveling coat, suggesting he'd come directly from wherever he'd taken a room, the town's small hotel, presumably. His expression carried the smooth confidence of a man who had never in his life encountered a room he didn't feel entitled to enter. His eyes went to Anna first, then to the papers on Cole's desk. The smooth confidence flickered. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, recovering immediately, extending a hand. "Henry Caldwell. I apologize for the hour. I find that ranchmen keep practical schedules, so I took the liberty." Cole did not stand. He did not take the extended hand. He looked at Caldwell with the same expression he'd worn when he told Vickers to collect his pay and leave, not heated, not theatrical, just absolutely clear. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "you came to my house after dark without an invitation." Caldwell lowered the unshaken hand with practiced grace. "A social call." "Sit down," Cole said. Caldwell blinked. He had not expected that particular tone. He sat. Cole's eyes moved to Anna briefly, a look that said, "I have this," and she stayed in her chair and said nothing and watched. "I understand you have business interests in this valley," Cole said. "That's correct. An investment opportunity. I've looked at the loan documents your firm sent to the Hendersons, the McCready family, and Dan Pryor," Cole said. He had clearly done more preparation than she'd realized. "I have a few questions about the terms." Caldwell's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes sharpened. "Those are private business communications, not when they concern my neighbors," Cole said. He leaned forward slightly. "I've also been looking at public records of your firm's previous transactions, in 3 counties in California." A pause. A very short, but very meaningful pause. "Those transactions were entirely lawful," Caldwell said. "They were written to appear lawful," Cole said. "There's a distinction. My lawyer in Billings understands the distinction. He's going to look at your Valley documents and explain it to the county recorder's office." Caldwell's pleasant expression underwent a slow and careful rearrangement. He looked at Anna. "I see," he said. "Miss Bell has been industrious." "Miss Bell," Cole said, "documented what she witnessed in your household because she understood what she was seeing. That's not a character flaw. That's integrity." His voice stayed even, unhurried. "What you told people in San Francisco about why she left your employment. I'd be careful about repeating that in a county where her character is already established and yours is not." Caldwell looked at the papers on the desk. "Those notes," he said, "were taken without authorization. From conversations that happened in front of her," Cole said. "In a room she was working in, written in her own time. You're welcome to make that argument to my lawyer." The room was very quiet. Caldwell was recalculating. She could see it. He was a man who read situations and found angles, who looked for the place where pressure would move something. And he was looking at Cole Whitaker and arriving at the same conclusion Anna had arrived at in the first week. This was not a man who moved under pressure. "What is it that you want, Mr. Whitaker?" Caldwell said finally. The pleasantness was gone now. Just the transaction. "I want you to withdraw from the valley," Cole said. "Your investment firm sends letters to the Hendersons, McCreadys, and Dan Pryor, informing them the offer has been reconsidered. You leave. You don't come back." "And if I decline?" "Then my lawyer files the documentation with the Federal Land Office, and we have a longer conversation," Cole said. "In public, with records, about your pattern of acquisition across multiple states." He paused. "Your choice." Caldwell stood. He straightened his coat. He looked at Anna one final time, and the look was not the confident, calculating look of the man she'd watched operate in San Francisco. It was something smaller, something that knew it had been matched. "You've been thorough, Miss Bell," he said. "Always have been," she said. "You used to mention it." He left the way he'd come, without ceremony, but without quite the same authority. The door closed. Anna let out a breath she had apparently been holding for the last several minutes. Her hands, she noticed, were gripped in her lap in a way that was going to leave marks on her palms. Cole looked at her. "That was faster than expected," he said. She almost laughed. It came out strange, compressed, the way laughter came out when it was carrying other things. "He'll still send the letters," she said. "To withdraw." "He will," Cole said. "He's a practical man. He doesn't like losing, but he understands when a position can't be held." He looked down at the papers. "I'll still ride to warn the neighbors tomorrow, and send these to Billings." "To warn him away from the next valley," she said. "Yes," Cole said. They sat in the quiet of it. Then Anna said very quietly, "I've been carrying those notes for a year and a half." Cole looked up. "I kept them because I didn't know what else to do with them," she said. "Because I knew what he'd done was wrong, and I couldn't prove it, and I had no one to give the information to, and I just kept them. Every time I moved, I packed them." Cole's expression was open in a way that it wasn't always open, the particular unguarded quality of a man who has stopped performing steadiness and is simply being steady. "You always intended to use them," he said. "You just needed to be somewhere safe enough." She hadn't thought of it that way, but he was right. She had been waiting without knowing she was waiting for exactly this. A place solid enough to stand on, and a person standing on it beside her. She looked at her hands. "I owe you an apology," she said. He frowned. "For what?" "For not telling you the full story sooner. You offered to help when Caldwell's first letter came and I held back. I was—" She stopped. Chose the accurate word. "Afraid." "Of what I'd think," he said, not a question. "Of what you'd decide," she said. "About whether I was worth the complication." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Anna," he said. She looked up. His voice, when he continued, was the voice of a man who had worked out what he wanted to say carefully before saying it. Not hesitant, but deliberate, the way he did most things that mattered to him. 3 years ago, I decided that this ranch would run itself, and I would run with it, and I wouldn't need anything else," he said. "I was wrong. Not about the ranch. About the rest of it." He looked at her steadily. "You've been here 9 weeks. In that time my crew works better, eats better, and talks to each other like men who respect one another. My foreman smiles for the first time since I hired him. A kid from another country is learning to cook and laughing at the dinner table. My house smells like something is growing in it." He paused. "You did that, not by trying to fix things, just by caring about them." She held his gaze. "You are not a complication," he said. "You are the best thing that has happened to this ranch in 3 years. And the person who tried to take that from you, who took it before he doesn't get a second attempt." She looked at him for a long time. She was not going to cry. She had learned in the years before Montana how to hold things carefully enough that they didn't spill. But the edges of the things she was holding were pressing harder than usual, and Cole Whitaker was looking at her with such unadorned directness that the careful architecture of her composure was doing something structural and concerning. "That's," she said. "You don't have to say anything," he said. She looked back down at the desk. She breathed. "Who taught you to say things like that?" she said. It came out before she thought about it. Soft, almost to herself, the echo of the question that had started all of this, the one that stopped her hands above the stove on the first night. Cole went quiet. Then he said, "Emily." One word. Her name. The whole weight of it in how he said it, not with grief, not with the careful distance he usually maintained around that particular topic, but with something that was the beginning of peace. "She used to tell me," he said slowly, "that I kept my good thoughts on the inside where nobody could use them. She said I was generous with my work and stingy with my words, and she intended to correct the imbalance." A breath. "I didn't always listen as well as I should have." Anna looked at him. "She'd have liked you," he said. "She had strong opinions about people who showed up and did the thing without making a production of it." He picked up her notes from the desk carefully and folded them. "She would have said you were her kind of person." There was an intimacy in this that was different from the intimacies that had come before the coffee at the right temperature. The book returned the herb garden. This was an intimacy of trust, the kind built on the decision to hand someone a real piece of yourself and let them hold it. She understood what it cost him. She reached across the desk. She placed her hand briefly over his, the barest contact, 2 seconds 3, and then withdrew it. He didn't look at her hand. He looked at her face. "Thank you," she said. "For Emily, for telling me." He nodded once. Outside the office, the ranch was settling into its nighttime sounds. The bunkhouse, the horses, the far-off call of something in the dark field. The Montana dark doing its deep and total thing. Inside, 2 people sat across a desk in a lamp-lit office with a folded set of papers between them that had traveled 1,500 miles and survived 3 years of being carried from one rented room to the next. Anna stood up. "I should let you sleep," she said. "You're riding early." "Yes," he said. She moved toward the door. "Anna." She stopped. She turned. Cole was still at the desk, and he was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. All the steadiness was still there, the controlled composure that was the ground note of his personality. But beneath it, visible, if you knew how to look, if you'd spent 9 weeks learning the landscape of this particular man's face, was something warm and unguarded, and entirely genuine. "I'm glad you answered that advertisement," he said. She stood in the doorway, and the thing she'd been telling herself for 9 weeks, firmly, quietly, the way she told herself all the necessary things. The thing about tending what needed tending, and nothing more, about not confusing warmth for something else, about the wisdom of keeping herself separate from the life she was building here. All of that said its piece, and then went quiet in the face of this man's steady, unhurried honesty. "So am I," she said. She went back to her room. She did not sleep for a long time. But for the first time in 3 years, the wakefulness wasn't fear. It was something she didn't have a practiced word for yet. Something that felt at its uncertain edges, like the beginning of home. Cole rode out before dawn. Anna heard his horse in the yard at 4:15, heard the gate, heard the sound of hooves fading north toward the Henderson property. She lay in her bed another 10 minutes, listening to the ranch settle back into its pre-dawn quiet, and then she got up, because lying still with her thoughts was not something she was capable of that morning. She lit the kitchen lamp and started the fire and put the coffee on, and she stood at the work table in the early dark, and tried to locate somewhere in the complicated geography of what she was feeling, something that resembled solid ground. Cole was writing to 3 neighbors to tell them what Henry Caldwell had been planning. He was carrying her notes to Billings. He had sat across his desk from her the night before and told her with the direct, unperformed honesty of a man who did not say things. He didn't mean that she was not a complication, that she was the best thing that had happened to this ranch in 3 years. She pressed her hands flat on the work table and breathed. She had spent 3 years making herself small enough to survive. Keeping her history in a sealed compartment, carrying her documentation, like a wound, she couldn't show anyone, moving from town to town with one suitcase and a reference letter from a dead man, rebuilding from the ground floor. Every time someone with more power than conscience decided she was a convenient target. She had done all of this without complaint, without asking for anything she hadn't earned, without permitting herself the luxury of depending on anyone who could take that dependency and turn it into leverage. And then she had arrived at Black Ridge Ranch, and somewhere between the first supper and the herb garden and the notes on Cole's desk and his voice saying, "So am I somewhere in all of that?" She had stopped being a woman in transit and had become, without quite deciding, to a woman who had arrived. That was what frightened her now. Not Caldwell, not the town's opinion, not even the exposure of her history. What frightened her was how much she had to lose. She had nothing to lose for 3 years, and that had been its own kind of freedom. A terrible freedom, the freedom of the person who has already had everything taken and understands that there is nothing left to be afraid of. And now she had something, and having something meant the fear came back refined and specific and considerably more personal. She pushed off the work table and went to work. By the time the ranch hands came in for breakfast, the kitchen was running at full capacity, and Annabelle had arrived at the same conclusion she'd arrived at every other morning when the fear tried to talk her out of something worth doing. She was not leaving. Whatever came through that door, she was not leaving. Tommy came in rubbing sleep from his eyes and stopped dead when he saw the spread she'd laid out, not the usual working breakfast good, but practical, but something she'd made with the particular focused energy of a woman who needed her hands occupied. Eggs 3 ways. Fresh bread still hot from the oven. Sausage from the Henderson farm. Jam she'd put up herself 2 weeks ago from the last of the summer berries. "What happened?" Tommy said. He looked alarmed. "Nothing happened," Anna said. "Eat your breakfast." "Something happened. You cook like this when something happened." Luis appeared beside him, looked at the table and said nothing, but he went immediately to the basin and washed his hands and came to help her without being asked, because Luis had developed the particular skill of reading Anna's kitchen, the way a good sailor read weather. "Cole rode out early," Tommy said, still surveying the food with detective energy. "He had business," Anna said. "With the neighbors." She looked at him. Tommy sat down. "Something's happening with those land loans," he said more quietly. "Grady mentioned it. The thing from the Denver firm." "Let Cole handle it," Anna said. "Anna, Tommy." She set a cup of coffee in front of him. "Eat your breakfast." He ate his breakfast. But he watched her with the expression of a young man who had excellent instincts that he was not yet entirely sure how to deploy, and she knew he'd figured out the shape of most of it, even without the details. The morning moved fast. Anna kept it moving on Purpose Prep Work Supply Organization, the weekly account she kept for Cole of kitchen costs and needs. A careful note about the herb garden's progress, because she had discovered that writing down small specific things helped her brain stay in the present when it kept trying to run ahead into consequences. At 10:30, Grady came to the kitchen door. She could tell from how he stood that he'd heard something. "The Henderson boy just rode in," he said. "Said Cole's at their place. Said there's a meeting happening. Cole, the McCreadys, Dan Pryor." He paused. "Said a lawyer from Billings arrived this morning." Anna set down the jar she was holding. "Already," she said. "Cole must have sent a rider 2 days ago," Grady said. "Before last night even." She absorbed this. Cole had reached out to the lawyer before Caldwell came to the ranch, before their conversation in the office. He'd been moving pieces before she'd given him her notes, acting on what she'd told him at the market on his own reading of the situation without waiting for her to finish deciding whether to trust him. "Is there trouble?" she said. "Don't know yet," Grady said. "Henderson boy said it was orderly, just a long meeting." She nodded. "Thank you, Grady." He stood a moment longer. "You doing all right?" The question surprised her. Grady was not a man who asked that kind of question. He was a man who solved problems and checked fences and kept the operational machinery of the ranch moving. Personal inquiry was not his mode. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. "Then, for what it's worth, whatever that man from San Francisco says about you, the crew's not interested." He said it flat like a fact without making it into more than it was. "Just so you know where things stand." He left before she could respond. She stood in the kitchen holding a jar of dried sage and feeling something move through her chest that she didn't have a word for. Not gratitude exactly. Bigger than that, and less comfortable, the feeling of being caught by people she hadn't expected to catch her. She put the sage in its correct place and went back to work. Cole returned at 3 in the afternoon. She heard the horse. She heard him talking to Grady outside, low voices, business-like, the sound of a conversation that was wrapping up rather than beginning. Then his step on the porch and the door, and he came into the kitchen in his riding coat and his trail dust, and stood there for a moment, looking at her with an expression that told her the answer before he said a word. "He's withdrawing," Cole said. She went still. "His firm sent letters this morning to all 3 families. The lawyer I contacted had already filed preliminary documentation with the Federal Land Office last week. Cole had sent him copies of Caldwell's standard contract language from the California cases before he even had her notes. The documentation, plus the pattern established in the California records, plus the witnesses in the valley." He stopped, ran a hand over his face, the gesture of a tired man who had been dealing with complicated things all day. "Caldwell's position was already weak before he walked into my office last night. He knew that," Anna said slowly. "He came anyway." "He came because he thought he still had a play," Cole said. "He thought if he got to me first, told me whatever he planned to tell me about you, it would compromise the source of the documentation." He looked at her. "He didn't account for me already knowing who you are." She sat down. She hadn't planned to sit down. Her knees made the decision without consulting her. "It's done," she said. "From the valley, yes. The families are safe. Their land is safe." He pulled out a chair and sat across from her at the small kitchen table. He can still circulate the story about San Francisco if he chooses. I can't stop him from talking." "Will he?" Cole was quiet a moment, considering it honestly, rather than reassuring her falsely. "He's a man who calculates risk," he said. "Right now in this valley, the story damages him more than it damages you. The lawyer from Billings has copies of your documentation with dates and signatures. If Caldwell claims publicly that you stole from him, and we produce evidence that he had motive to discredit a witness against him." He shook his head. "He'll stay quiet, for now." "For now," she said. "It's enough," he said. "For now is enough." She looked at her hands on the table. "You sent for the lawyer before I gave you my notes," she said. "Yes." "Before last night?" "Yes." She looked up. "You were already moving." "I told you at the market we'd deal with it," he said. "That wasn't a comfort, Anna. That was a statement of intent." She held his gaze. She wanted to say several things. She wanted to say she was not accustomed to people meaning what they said with that kind of consistency. She wanted to say that she'd spent the morning standing at the work table talking herself into staying, which was absurd because she'd already decided to stay, but the fear didn't operate on logic. She wanted to say that the ranch hands eating her food, and Grady asking if she was all right, and Tommy's completely unsubtle surveillance of Cole's emotional state had accumulated into something she hadn't expected to feel in Montana or anywhere else. She wanted to say all of this. What she said was, "You must be hungry. You've been writing since before dawn." Cole looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I could eat." And there it was, the simplest exchange in the world, wrapped around everything. Neither of them had said, and she got up and went to the stove, and he sat at the table while she heated what she'd kept aside for him, and the kitchen held them both in its warm, ordinary way, and it was the most domestic and the most true thing that had happened at Black Ridge Ranch in a very long time. The knock at the front door came an hour later. Anna was washing up. Cole was still at the kitchen table going over a document. Luis had come in to start prep for supper, and was working quietly on the far side of the kitchen. Tommy was somewhere. Tommy was always somewhere. The knock was a particular kind of knock. Deliberate. The knock of someone who had decided to do something and was going to do it with intention. Cole looked up. Their eyes met. He stood and went to the front door. Anna followed because she understood without being told the way she understood most things now at Black Ridge Ranch, that this was not a moment to stay in the kitchen. The woman at the door was somewhere in her 50s, with the particular bearing of someone who had been running things for so long that authority had become physical. Her name was Margaret Pryor, Dan Pryor's wife, and she had 3 inches of height on Anna and the eyes of a woman who had seen considerable life and formed clear opinions about most of it. She looked at Cole. "I owe you a conversation," she said. "Come in," Cole said. Margaret Pryor came in. She looked around the front room with the assessment of a woman conducting an inventory. Then she looked at Anna. "You're the cook," she said. Not dismissively, just precisely. "I am," Anna said. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "Dan told me what that man was planning with our water rights. What would have happened if Cole hadn't, if you hadn't?" She stopped. She had the manner of a woman who didn't make speeches and was discovering that this occasion might require one. "I wanted to say it to your face. The documentation you kept. The risk you took in keeping it. My family's land is safe because of something you did 3 years ago in a kitchen in San Francisco." The room was very quiet. "You were protecting yourself," Margaret continued with the blunt honesty of a woman who called things what they were. "I understand that, but it ended up protecting us. And I'm not a woman who lets that pass without saying so." Anna looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "I'm glad it mattered." "It mattered," Margaret said. She looked at Cole. She looked at Anna. She looked between them in the way that women who had been alive for 50-something years and had seen a great deal of human behavior looked at two people who were operating on a long and complicated delay. "You two are—" She stopped, made a small sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "Never mind, it's not my business." Then, "It might become my business if you keep making me wait for the conclusion." Cole looked like a man who had just stepped on unexpected ice. Anna looked at the floor. Margaret moved toward the door. "I'm inviting you both to supper Saturday. You and whoever you want to bring from the ranch." She paused with her hand on the door. "Cole Dan wants to talk to you about the spring grazing rights." "Anna?" She looked at her directly. "I've been trying to perfect a particular apple cake for 2 years and getting nowhere. I wonder if you'd look at the recipe." "I'd be glad to," Anna said. Margaret left. The door closed. Cole and Anna stood in the front room in the particular silence of two people who had just been seen very clearly by someone with excellent vision. "She's—" Cole started. "Yes," Anna said. "She's always been." "Yes," Anna said again. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved in that way. It had the small, genuine movement that wasn't quite a smile, but was its close neighbor. "Saturday supper," he said. "Saturday supper," she confirmed. Something settled between them like a word that had been on the tip of a tongue for too long and had finally quietly been spoken. The real complication arrived 2 days later, not from Caldwell, and not from outside the ranch. It came from Tommy. Tommy, who had the instincts of a bloodhound and the subtlety of a thunderstorm, arrived at the kitchen before breakfast, with his hat in his hands and an expression Anna had never seen on him before. Serious in a way that sat awkwardly on his 19-year-old face. The expression of someone who has thought carefully about whether to say something and decided that not saying it is worse. "I need to tell you something," he said. Luis at the stove made no move to leave. He was part of the kitchen's confidence now, and all three of them knew it. "Sit down," Anna said. Tommy sat. "There are people in town," he said. "Talking." He turned his hat in his hands. "Caldwell's already left 2 days ago, but he said things before he left. To a few people at the hotel bar. About you." Anna kept her expression neutral. "What did he say?" "The theft accusation," Tommy said. "And something else." He looked up at her. He said you were in a relationship with Cole. That he made it sound like you'd—" He stopped. His ears had gone red. "Like you'd used certain means to secure your position here." Silence. Luis turned from the stove. His expression was controlled, but his eyes had gone flat in a way that meant something was burning behind them. Anna set down her spoon. "Who heard this?" she said. "Peter's at the feed store. His wife probably. Mrs. Henderson was at the hotel that evening for a different reason. She overheard part of it." He looked miserable. "I heard it at the feed store yesterday when Grady sent me for supplies. Peters didn't know who I was." She processed this. This was the move she hadn't seen coming. Not the theft accusation she'd prepared for that. Cole had prepared for that. They had documentation and a lawyer and a valley full of neighbors who knew her by her work. But this was different. This was the kind of accusation that lived in whispers, rather than records that spread through the social fabric of a small town, like a stain that couldn't be legally addressed, because it existed entirely in implication. He hadn't come after her past. He'd come after her future. "Does Cole know?" she said. "I don't know," Tommy said miserably. "I came to you first." She nodded slowly. Then she stood up and smoothed her dress and said, "Eat your breakfast, both of you. I'll handle this." She went to find Cole. He was at the north fence with Grady, which she knew because she'd learned his schedule, and she walked the quarter-mile to the fence without hurrying, because the way she arrived at this conversation mattered. Cole saw her coming from 50 yards. Something in how she was walking told him something. He said a word to Grady, who nodded and moved away, and Cole met her at the fence post. She told him plainly, and without cushioning, what Caldwell had said at the hotel. She told him who had heard it. She told him what Tommy had reported, and when. Cole listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "He targeted the one thing he thought I couldn't counter with paperwork," he said. "Yes," she said. "He's wrong," Cole said. She looked at him. "Anna, every person in this town who has been to this ranch in the last 10 weeks. He stopped, started again more carefully. "The men here will say what's true. Grady will say what's true. The Pryors. The McCreadys." Margaret saw this situation in about 40 seconds and called it honest. He met her eyes. "The kind of story Caldwell is telling lives on silence. It dies when the people involved simply say what's true." "And what's true," she said. She had not meant to say it that way. She'd meant it practically. What specific truth, what account, what public statement. But it came out differently, and they both heard it come out differently. Cole looked at her. The fence post was between them. Montana went in all directions. The morning was cool and bright, the kind of morning that made the territory look like a promise. "What's true?" he said slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who was not going to say a thing this important quickly, "is that you came to this ranch 9 weeks ago and you changed it. Not by trying to change it, just by being who you are." He paused. "What's true is that I notice everything you do, and I have for 9 weeks, and I have not spent time worrying about the appropriate speed of noticing it, because life is short, and I already know what it costs to wait too long to say a real thing." She was very still. "What's true," he said, "is that I want you to stay. Not as my cook Anna, not as the person who manages my kitchen and looks after my crew, though you are those things, and I value them." He looked at her with the full steadiness of his eyes, the gray-green that read landscapes for a living. "I want you to stay because this is your home, because you have built it into something alive again. Because when I come in for coffee in the morning, and you've already made it the right temperature, it's not a small thing. It is not a small thing to me." The fence post stood between them. Anna looked at it. Then she looked at him. She had prepared 100 careful arguments for why this was complicated, why it was premature, why a woman with her history could not afford the particular vulnerability of this. She had carried those arguments the way she'd carried everything else, efficiently, thoroughly, for the long haul. She let them go. "Cole," she said. "Yes," he said, like a man who already knew what came after his name. "The coffee is at the right temperature because I pay attention," she said. "I have paid very close attention, for 9 weeks." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I'm not—" She stopped, found the true version. "I'm not practiced at this, at trusting the way you trust. Directly. I've learned to come at it sideways to protect myself while I'm doing it." "I know that too," he said. "You can come at it sideways if you need to. I'm not going anywhere." She looked at this man, the worn boots, the hat that had been through hard seasons, the hands that had spent years working the earth, the face that had learned to keep its feelings inside until he'd decided they were worth saying. And she thought about Emily Whitaker at the kitchen table, writing out her weekly menus and arguing with herself about them. She thought about the herb garden outside the kitchen window. She thought about Luis learning bread from muscle memory. Tommy arriving early for lessons he claimed he didn't need. Grady asking if she was all right in his flat, no-ceremony way. She thought about a woman who had traveled 1,500 miles with one suitcase and arrived somewhere she didn't expect to stay. "The town will talk," she said. "Towns talk," he said. "Then they find something else to talk about." "And Caldwell is gone," Cole said. "And the people in this valley know the truth. And Margaret Pryor has already, I guarantee you, had 3 conversations this morning correcting the record." Despite everything, she almost smiled. "You don't know that," she said. "I know Margaret Pryor," he said. She looked at him. And then something happened that she hadn't predicted, which was increasingly a feature of her life at Black Ridge Ranch. She stopped calculating. She stopped anticipating. She stopped running the 1,000 possible outcomes of the next 5 minutes through the machinery of her caution. She stepped forward, past the fence post. Cole reached out, not grabbing, not theatrical, just the natural movement of a man reaching for the thing he intends to hold, and his hand found hers. His hands were everything she'd known they would be: large, steady, warm, careful in the way. Hands were careful when they understood the difference between force and strength. They stood like that at the north fence, with Montana going in all directions, and the morning laying itself out before them bright and possible. "I answered an advertisement," she said. "Cook wanted." "I know," he said. "It said nothing about this." "No," he said. "It didn't." "I think you misled me, Mr. Whitaker," she said, very quietly. He looked down at her, and there it was, the full version of the smile that had been showing up in pieces for 9 weeks, the one that reached his eyes and changed the whole character of his face, the one that belonged to the man he'd been before. Grief had reorganized everything. "I'll make it right," he said, "if you give me the opportunity." She looked at their hands. She looked up at him. "You'll have to come in for coffee first," she said. "Same as always." "Same as always," he agreed. They walked back to the ranch house together. The north fence stood behind them. The herb garden was visible from 50 yards, green and real and growing the way things grew when someone decided they were worth tending. Tommy was on the porch. He saw them coming. He looked at their hands. He looked at their faces. He let out a single quiet sound of satisfaction that he probably thought was inaudible. Anna looked at him as she came up the porch steps. "Tommy," she said. "Yes," he said with elaborate innocence. "Not a word." "I haven't said anything," he said. "You're thinking loudly," she said. Luis appeared in the doorway behind Tommy. He looked at the two of them. He looked at Anna. A quiet smile crossed his face, brief, real, the kind that came from somewhere private. "Breakfast is ready," he said. And the ranch gathered the way it gathered every morning, the men coming in from their early work, the table filling up the kitchen, warm with the smell of everything Anna had made from a pantry that had held only beans not so long ago. Cole sat at the head of the table. Anna sat at her usual place, and it occurred to her, the thought arriving quietly without announcement, that she had a usual place now. That usual was a thing she had again. Grady came in last, as he always did, having done a final check of whatever needed final checking. He sat down and looked at the table and looked at the room and said nothing for a moment. Then he looked at Anna. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Grady," she said. He nodded. He picked up his coffee. He looked across the table at Cole, and something passed between the two men, the communication of people who had worked together long enough to say real things without words, and Grady's expression settled into something that looked on his particular face like satisfaction. Cole looked at Anna. She looked back. At the other end of the table, Tommy was saying something loud and entertaining about the fence post situation that had apparently developed new comic dimensions since his last telling. Luis was eating with the quiet focus of someone who had found his footing. Calhoun was arguing pleasantly with Patterson again. Black Ridge Ranch sat at the table and ate the food that had brought it back to life and was, in this particular morning, in this particular autumn, exactly what a home was supposed to be. Part 5. The Taste of Love. The Saturday supper at the Pryor Ranch changed things in the way that certain evenings did not, with announcement, not with ceremony, but with the quiet permanence of something that had been decided and simply needed the right moment to become visible. Margaret Pryor ran her table, the way she ran everything, with complete authority and the specific warmth of a woman who believed that feeding people was a form of love, and therefore not optional. She seated 14 people around a table built for 10 added boards and mismatched chairs without apology, and produced a meal from a kitchen that had clearly seen 40 years of serious work. Anna sat between Cole and Luis, which had not been arranged by anyone, but which felt once they were all seated entirely inevitable. The valley had come. Not all of it. This was not a formal gathering, but the Hendersons were there, and the Macreadys and Dan Pryor's adult sons, who worked the neighboring land, and two families Anna hadn't met yet, who turned out to have heard about her through the particular mechanism of rural information networks that moved faster and more thoroughly than anything written down. A woman named Ruth Henderson, perhaps 60, with the direct manner of someone who had decided life was too short for indirection, looked across the table at Anna and said, "You're the one who kept those notes." "I am," Anna said. Ruth nodded once with the finality of a verdict delivered. "Good woman." That was all. No elaboration. No speech. Just the simple declaration offered across a dinner table by someone who had earned the right to make it, and the evening moved forward. Cole watched this from Anna's left. He said nothing, but she felt the quality of his silence, the one she'd learned to read, the warm and careful one, the one that meant he was taking something in and holding it. Margaret produced her apple cake after supper, set it in front of Anna, and said, "Now." Anna tasted it. She identified 3 things immediately. The ratio of spice was half a measure off, the butter had been added in the wrong sequence, and the base temperature had been too high for the first 15 minutes, which created a texture that was correct but not quite right. She said none of this yet. She said, "May I see the recipe?" Margaret produced it. Anna read it. Then she looked up. "The sequence on the 3rd step," Anna said. "Try adding the butter before the eggs, not after." Margaret stared at the recipe. "That's not what—" "I know. Try it." Margaret looked at her. Then she looked at the recipe. Then she looked at Anna again with the expression of a woman who had baked this cake 30 times and had not once considered that the problem was the sequence. She said. "Your spice ratio is also slightly off," Anna said. "Add a 1/4 measure more of cinnamon and reduce the nutmeg." "The recipe says—" "The recipe is wrong about the nutmeg," Anna said pleasantly. Margaret stared at her for a full 3 seconds. Then she began to laugh, a real laugh, deep and genuine, the laugh of a woman encountering someone who was not intimidated by her. "Cole," Margaret said without looking away from Anna. "You found a good one." Cole said into his coffee cup, "I'm aware." Dan Pryor from the other end of the table said, "About time too." And that apparently was the Valley's verdict on the matter, delivered over apple cake and mismatched chairs in the kitchen of a woman who ran things and had decided in about 40 seconds of observation that the situation at Black Ridge Ranch was acceptable and could proceed. They rode home in the wagon under stars that Anna had come to understand as Montana's particular extravagance, the kind of sky that existed only at this distance from anything crowded. Cole drove without hurrying. The ranch hands who'd come along rode ahead, their voices carrying back in the cold air. Tommy explaining something at volume, Luis responding with the dry precision he'd developed for managing Tommy's enthusiasms. "Margaret likes you," Cole said. "Margaret likes that I told her the recipe was wrong," Anna said. "Margaret likes anyone who tells her a hard truth without flinching," he said. "It's her primary qualification for people." Anna smiled. She could feel the cold in the air and the warmth of the blanket across her lap and the slight sway of the wagon. She was tired in the good way, the way that came from an evening that had taken something out of her and put something better in. "Cole," she said. "Yes." "Margaret said something to me in the kitchen while you were talking to Dan." He waited. "She said—" Anna paused, finding the right words. "She said that Emily would have liked the way the ranch sounds now. She said she can hear it from the road sometimes in the evenings, the dinner table." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Margaret knew Emily well," he said. "I know. That's why I'm telling you." She looked ahead at the dark road. "I wanted you to know that I heard it, as I took it as a gift, not a complication." Cole turned his head and looked at her. She looked back. "It is a gift," he said. That's the right word for it. The wagon moved through the dark, and neither of them said anything else, and it was the best kind of silence, the kind that didn't need filling, because everything necessary had already been said. The first snow came 3 weeks later. Montana announced winter, the way Montana announced most things without warning and without apology. Anna woke to a changed world outside her window, and lay still for a moment, listening to the quality of the quiet that snow produced, the particular muffled hush of a world that had been rearranged overnight. She got up. She lit the stove. She started the coffee. By the time the first ranch hand appeared in the kitchen doorway, the kitchen was warm and the smell of bread was doing what it always did, pulling people toward it before they'd consciously decided to be pulled. Luis came in 15 minutes early, which he always did. He had over the past weeks quietly, and without announcement, become Anna's kitchen partner, rather than her student, capable enough now that she found herself consulting him, rather than asking his opinion on ratios and timing. Watching him develop the particular instincts that serious cooking required and couldn't be taught, only grown. He came in now and looked at the kitchen and said, "First snow." "Yes," she said. I went to the window, looked out and said nothing else for a moment. She knew he was thinking about home, about wherever home meant for him before Montana, and she let him have the moment without filling it. Then he said, "What are we making?" She told him. He went to work. The kitchen had a rhythm now that was entirely its own, built from 12 weeks of decisions and adjustments and the accumulation of what worked. It was not Emily Whitaker's kitchen. Anna had been careful about that, the way you were careful about something you respected enough not to imitate. It was Annabelle's kitchen, and it ran the way things ran when the person running them had stopped performing competence and arrived at the real thing. Cole came in for his first coffee. He stopped in the doorway, the way he had stopped on the first morning, and he looked at the kitchen, at Luis, at the work table, at the herb bundles, drying from the ceiling, at the organized shelves, and the bread coming out of the oven, and the 2 cups Anna had already poured, and his expression was the open one, the unguarded one, the one that belonged to the man emerging steadily from 3 years of deliberate narrowing. He took his coffee. He stood at the window. "First snow," he said. Luis already noted that, Anna said. Was he moved by it? Briefly, she said. Then he went back to the biscuits. Cole smiled into his cup. He stood at the window a moment longer. Then he said without turning, "I need to talk to you about something. Tonight when things quiet down." She looked at his back. "All right," she said. Hy went out with his coffee, and Anna went back to the bread, and she spent the rest of the morning not thinking about what he wanted to discuss, which she accomplished by thinking about it continuously and without pause. Tommy arrived for breakfast with snow on his hat, and an energy that suggested he had decided the first snow of the season was an occasion requiring commentary. "It's winter," he announced. "Tommy," Anna said. Sit down and eat your breakfast." He sat. He ate. He looked between Anna and the window, and Anna and the window in a way that communicated something she chose not to examine directly. Luis, without looking up from his plate, said, "He's been like this since he saw it." "I was moved," Tommy said with dignity. "You nearly fell off the porch," Luis said. "The snow was slippery. That's not emotion, that's physics." Calhoun, passing with his coffee, said, "It was emotion. I saw your face." The table laughed. The table laughed together the way it always did now, without hierarchy, without the careful distance of men who didn't quite trust each other, with the ease of people who had eaten together long enough to know where the laughter lived. Anna stood at the kitchen doorway watching it. She thought about the first evening, the silence that had fallen over the table after the first bite of the first meal she'd made. She thought about 15 men eating beans and salt pork in a kitchen that smelled like nothing was growing. She thought about the careful defensive quiet of a dinner table that had forgotten what it was for. She thought, this is what it was for. The day moved fast, as winter days on a working ranch did. Snow meant fence checks, meant moving cattle, meant the doubled logistics of every task that had to happen in cold. Cole was out most of the day. Grady was everywhere. The bunkhouse was louder than usual in the good way, men who had come in from cold work, eating hard and warming up and finding the kitchen door open and something hot ready when they arrived. Anna had prepared for this. She'd planned the winter kitchen weeks ago, worked out what the ranch would need when the temperature dropped and the work got harder. Cole had given her the budget without question when she'd presented the plan. He trusted her completely. She had not been trusted completely in a very long time, and the experience of it still surprised her sometimes, the way it felt not like a weight, but like the removal of one. It was near 8 in the evening when the kitchen finally cleared out. Luis had gone to the bunkhouse. Tommy had been sent out by Anna 40 minutes prior because he was trying to help in a way that was not helping. The fire was banked the kitchen clean, the following day's prep already staged. She heard Cole's step. He came into the kitchen in his heavy winter coat, still cold from the last round of checks, and he poured himself the coffee she'd left on the stove. She always left coffee on the stove, and he sat down at the small table and set something on it. A book. Small leather-bound, worn at the corners. Emily's recipe book. Anna sat down slowly. She hadn't seen it since the day she'd found it in the cabinet and brought it to Cole's office. That had been more than 2 months ago. She'd thought about it sometimes, wondering if he'd put it away again, wondering if finding it had been painful for him, or if the pain had changed shape over time into something more like the bittersweet presence of a good memory. Cole looked at the book. He didn't open it. "I've been thinking about something," he said. She waited. "Emily's book has been on my shelf since you brought it to me." He traced the edge of the cover with one finger. "I opened it after that night, read some of it." A pause. "I hadn't been able to read it before. The 2 years after she died, I couldn't open it. I tried once and couldn't." Anna said nothing. She understood this was a thing he needed to say in its own time. "There's a recipe in here," he said. He opened the book carefully and turned to a page near the middle. She marked it with a piece of ribbon. It's marked because she was working on it. She had notes in the margin about what to change. She never finished working on it. He turned the book toward Anna. She looked at the page. Emily Whitaker's handwriting, small and clear, and organized with pencil notes in the margins. "Too much salt. Try reducing by half. Better with the vinegar." Cole liked the second version. The recipe was for a slow-cooked beef and vegetable dish. Simple, careful, the kind of thing built to last through a long winter. She looked at the margin note. Cole liked the second version. Her throat did something complicated. "I can't make this," Cole said. "I never could cook worth a damn, and I'm not going to start pretending." He looked at her. "I thought if you were willing, you might finish working out what she was trying to get right. Not to—" He stopped, found the right words. "Not to make it hers, to make it yours, to make it something this kitchen grows into its own version of." Anna looked at the recipe. She looked at the margin notes in a dead woman's handwriting. She looked at Cole. "She wrote that you liked the second version," she said. "I did," he said. "I told her so. She made it 3 more times after that, trying to get it exactly right." He paused. She was particular about getting things exactly right. "So am I," Anna said. "I know," he said. She reached across the table and touched the edge of the book carefully. She turned the page and looked at the next recipe and the next, not reading them thoroughly, just getting a sense of the woman in the handwriting, the personality in the margin notes, the particular way Emily Whitaker had organized her knowledge. She was very methodical, Anna said. "Extremely," Cole said. "Drove me half crazy sometimes. She'd redo something 14 times looking for the thing that made it right." He looked at the book with an expression that was no longer grief, not quite, but its more livable successor, something that held loss and warmth together without one canceling the other. "I think you would have argued with each other constantly and been good friends inside a week." Anna smiled. She kept her eyes on the book. "About food specifically. About everything," he said. She had opinions. On most subjects. He paused. "She would have told me much sooner than I told myself that I needed to stop running the ranch like a man who was done wanting things." The kitchen was quiet around the sentence. "Cole," Anna said. "I know," he said. "We've said the important things already, or mostly." He looked at her. "I just want to say this one clearly. I spent 3 years deciding that what I had was enough, the land, the work, the function of it. I was wrong, not about the land, about the idea that function was sufficient." He held her gaze. "You are not sufficient to me, Anna. You are necessary. Do you understand the difference? She understood the difference. She understood it completely, in the specific way she understood the difference between a meal made to be adequate and a meal made because someone mattered. She looked at the recipe book and at the man across the small kitchen table, and she put down in that moment the last thing she'd been carrying, the last careful distance, the last practiced argument for why permanence was a risk she couldn't afford. She set it down the way you set something down when your arms were tired and the ground was solid enough to hold it. Ask me again, she said. He looked at her. The question, she said. The one you asked on the first night. How was still for a moment. Then quietly, with the full weight of everything the question had come to mean in 12 weeks and 3 years, and the particular way two people sometimes found each other at the exact right moment, they were capable of being found. Who taught you to cook like that? She looked at him, and this time, she didn't go quiet. This time, her hands didn't stop. This time, the answer came from somewhere that was no longer sealed or defended, or carried alone through rented rooms in cities that hadn't been home. A man named Dubois, she said, who believed that food was the most honest form of care, who believed you could tell everything true about a person by how they fed others, who taught me that patience was not a small virtue, that patience was the thing that turned ordinary ingredients into something that made people feel less alone. She paused. And then I taught myself the rest, she said. In every kitchen where I had to start over, I taught myself that it mattered to make things well, even when no one was watching. That how you did the ordinary things said more about you than how you handled the exceptional ones. She held his gaze. And then I came here, and I learned something I hadn't known I was missing. What? He said. That cooking for people you love is an entirely different thing, she said. It's the same hands, the same recipes, the same fire. But it's different. It tastes different. I think it is different. Cole looked at her across the small table. The lamp between them was burning low, doing what lamps did in kitchens late in the evening, making everything smaller and warmer and more specific, cutting the world down to the size of a table, and 2 cups of coffee, and the things that mattered. I've never tasted love before, he said. Not food made that way. Not until you came here. She felt those words settle through her, not dramatically, not with the quality of revelation, but with the quiet permanence of something that had been true for weeks and was now finally spoken. You have now, she said. He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. His grip was the same as it had been at the north fence, large and steady and careful, the grip of a man who understood the difference between holding and grasping, who had the strength to hold hard and the wisdom to hold gently. They sat like that for a while in the kitchen that smelled like bread in winter and the green persistence of herbs growing in a window box with Emily Whitaker's recipe book, open between them, and 12 weeks of ordinary, extraordinary mornings behind them, and Montana pressing its vast quiet, dark against the walls. Then Anna said, I'll work out the recipe. I know you will, Cole said. It'll take a few tries. Take as long as you need, he said. We're not going anywhere. There it was again. The word she'd been learning to stand inside without bracing for the floor to move. She looked at their hands on the table. She thought about the advertisement. Cook wanted ranch kitchen, honest wages room provided, and the woman who had answered it with $2 in her boot, and a story she intended to tell no one, and a set of notes she'd been carrying for a year and a half, not knowing what to do with. She thought about that woman stepping off the supply wagon and seeing a man who looked at her like a problem he was trying to understand. She thought about the first supper, the silence that fell over 15 men, the question that stopped her hands. She thought about Tommy arriving early every morning claiming he happened to be awake, about Luis laughing at the dinner table, about Grady asking if she was all right, about Margaret Pryor in 40 seconds calling the situation honest and the thing it was. She thought about an herb garden planted in the dirt of a window box coming back from half-dead growing because someone decided it was worth tending. The twist she had not seen coming, the one that had arranged itself quietly over 12 weeks while she was looking at other things, was this: she had come to Black Ridge Ranch to survive, to find a place where nobody knew her past, to make herself small enough and useful enough to go unnoticed. She had not come to be known. She had not come to be stayed for. She had not come to become the reason a house felt alive again. And yet, here was Cole Whitaker, holding her hand across a kitchen table at 9 o'clock on the first snowy night of winter, with a recipe book between them that connected 3 lives into a single continuing story. And here was Annabelle, who had carried everything alone and called it strength, who had sealed her history in compartments and called it survival, who had moved from city to city, learning the geography of impermanence. Here she was in a kitchen. She had built into something real on a ranch. She had helped bring back to life in a territory large enough to hold the whole of what she was. Not a woman in transit, a woman who had arrived. Outside the snow was still coming down, soft and indifferent, covering the fence lines and the herb garden and the long road from Billings, covering the tracks of a man who had come to take something and left with less than he'd brought. The bunkhouse was quiet. The horses were settled. Black Ridge Ranch was doing what it did in its sleep, holding together, holding strong, the way things held that had been built with intention and maintained with care. In the kitchen, the lamp burned low. Cole let go of her hand long enough to refill both their cups, and then he came back and sat down, and Anna opened Emily Whitaker's recipe book to the marked page and picked up a pencil from the table, and she began reading the margin notes. The second version, the one he'd liked, the thing that had been almost right and never quite finished. She would finish it. Not because it was her job. Not because finishing things was what she did, though it was. Not because she owed anyone anything, or because she was filling a space someone else had left. But because this kitchen was hers now. Because this table was hers. Because the man sitting across from her drinking his coffee, in the particular silence that had its own language, was someone she had chosen and who had chosen her. And choosing meant building, and building meant making things that lasted. She made a note in the margin below Emily's. Her own handwriting beside the dead woman's in the same book on the same page, not erasing, not replacing, but continuing. Try the second version with the herbs from the garden. Cole will like this one too. She wrote it the way she cooked, with patience, with intention, with the full weight of her attention on the thing in front of her. Cole looked at what she'd written. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She'd have liked that." "I think so," Anna said. She looked up at him. He looked at her. And there in that kitchen on that first winter night, with snow falling on a valley that was safe, and a table that was full, and a recipe that was finally going to be right, Annabelle stopped being a woman who had survived her life and became completely and without reservation a woman who was living it. That was the thing about love she understood now. Real love. Not the kind that demanded you be someone other than what you were. Not the kind that cost you your history or your voice or the particular way you'd learned to carry yourself through hard years. Real love was the kind that saw the notes in the margin, all of them, the old ones and the new ones, and called them both worth keeping. Cole Whitaker had tasted only survival for 3 years. Annabelle had cooked for survival even longer than that. But on the first night of winter, in a kitchen that smelled like bread and herbs and the particular warmth of something growing in a cold season, they sat across a small table and tasted something neither of them had known they were missing, and the lonely cowboy who had stopped wanting things discovered at last that wanting was not weakness but the truest form of courage, and the woman who had carried everything alone discovered that setting something down was not surrender but the beginning of the only journey that had ever mattered. They had come to each other through hard years and long roads and the specific mercy of an ordinary advertisement on a bulletin board in a city too large to see its own smallest miracles. And they did not waste the